Follies' original game mode was good and y'all are cowards. Or, well, I'm going to title the video something inflammatory like that. Apologies at the beginning because my cat Calypso is clicking and chirping at some birds in the background, so you might hear that, especially because this is going to be super quick, and I'm not going to edit this video terribly because I am still working on my main Follies Hunt video for the lore, the analysis style video that I do. But I just have to say that I am a little miffed at the community for having such a problem with Follies Hunt and getting it changed. Firstly, because I centered all of the story that I was telling about this game mode around the promise of the style that the game mode was presenting, that it was going to be more horror themed, that it was going to have an enemy that cannot be killed by us and can kill us. You know, some kind of challenge that isn't just based on big number and many enemies that you have to fight. So for anyone who wasn't following along as the Follies Hunt, the Shadographer update launched, wasn't following the conversation, essentially the way the original Follies Hunt mission went is that you would enter into Vesper Relay, you would jump through the painting, explore the area, and you would look for 3 canvases as well as inkwells that you would use to collect paint to then fulfill the canvases and complete the objectives. Fulfilling all 3, completed the mission, and caused extract. While you were doing that, you had one other side objective, which is the farming objective, and you had the survival objective, the obstacles that were getting in your way. And the primary obstacle, of course, would be Follie herself, who would spawn in the room that you were standing in whenever you popped a balloon to collect some of the atriumenum, whenever you completed an objective, and also if you lingered too long in a certain space, or if you collected some paint. Essentially, any kind of progress that you would do in the mission would cause Follie to, or at least it appeared that any action you could do would give Follie some information as to your location when you made progress, and cause her to spawn in your location. Being within Follie's radius would take away your energy if you were a Warframe, so that you wouldn't be able to use your Warframe abilities, and it would cause damage pretty quickly, rather aggressively over time, in order to give some lethality, in order to raise the stakes and make sure the player was trying to stay away from Follie and retreat from Follie during this mode. Because if she were just invincible and she was following you around, what would the point be? That's not terribly scary on its own. This was very exciting for me, and I enjoyed my first couple runs through the mission because it reminded me of horror games, of the stalker killer style horror games like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, or of the original Slender Man games, of Soma, also sometimes called disempowerment horror, games that essentially made it so that the player couldn't fight back. In terms of popular horror games at the time, the main genre that people gravitated to was survival horror, your Resident Evils, your Silent Hills. They were games that, to more or less a degree, gave you the power to fight back, to use guns, with things like the Resident Evil series being way more centered around combat, and things taking after the Silent Hill series being way more focused on mood, atmosphere, and theme, though still had some combat element to it. Now, Warframe has a few times in its past tackled horror theming, and not just like horrific details in its world building, not just grimdark fantasy, but actually horror, engaging with the themes as horror, with the gameplay as horror. We're looking back to the original Chains of Hero quest, with the walking around segments, with the enemies that couldn't be killed, that represented Rel's emotions, while getting chased down by corrupted Red Veil members. Or the Abyssal Zone unlockable mission node that had a very spooky, scary environment, very dark, and had NPCs talking about how afraid they were. But the way they tried to sell the gameplay on horror was having the difficulty of the zone ramp up as more Eximus units would be spawned at the latter half of the mission, a significantly large number of them, while the player would be disempowered by means of a debuff whenever they were holding the in-game collectible objective, the Defixios. However, that game mode was quickly solved in its own way by realizing it was just a regular exterminate mission, and you could complete the exterminate portion of the mission first, then collect a Defixios near the end of the level and go to extraction. So you didn't actually have to engage with the disempowering aspect of that mission very much at all once you learned how to run the mission as a farm. With Follie's original game mode, you didn't have that option. But these as gameplay modes have always been very far and few between, almost non-existent. And more recently, in the past few years, the horror theming has basically been relegated to Nabarus Night collectibles that would play little cinematics. And the most recent one of those cinematics was The Wild Hunt, which, to be quite honest, I was disappointed with at first. I didn't think that story was nearly as good as the Nabarus Night story with Chitter Chatter Snap and whatever the other two were called, the other two Orokin costumes. So from that perspective, I was genuinely impressed that we were finally getting something new, something different, but more importantly, I was going to sing the game's praises for being something that the disempowerment horror video games have never really been able to achieve, which is that in disempowerment horror, the main thing that stands out for all of them is that movement is bad. All you have is usually walking or maybe a light sprint button with a flashlight that doesn't work, a fuse puzzle, and a locker to hide in. And that has been the genre for most people who tackle creating a stalker horror type game for a long time now. Warframe essentially set itself up as one of those games, but using Warframe's movement system as the gameplay. And that was interesting, it was novel, it was different, it was difficult without being about numbers and bullet sponges. And it should have stayed that way. But outside of the core conceit of the gameplay, I guess there were a few other complaints that centered around some of the more broader concerns about the game that surrounds this particular game mode. First one being that people were apparently having trouble finding the balloons while they were exploring the environments. They weren't seeing them. I'm not sure why that was the case, because before the balloons were changed to have an inky, shiny, glittery look to them, they did also shine. They would reflect light every few seconds, not every few seconds, a few times a second, in order for people to be able to notice them and notice what they were looking at as a container that can be popped, the way other containers in the game can be broken, will have that little shimmering light. My preference was for the original balloon look because I think it matched the aesthetic and sold the clowning, the circus of it all a little bit better, but that's really not too important of a detail. I can let go of that. And the second complaint that people had is that Follie would spawn camp the objective. I don't actually think she was spawn camping the objective. She was following the player, and the player was heading to the objective. And if the player died at the objective, then she would still be there when you respawn. And my solution to this was to use what I had learned about the gameplay to lure her out, the way you would do in a stalker killer, a disempowerment horror game, by moving into another room and then trying to avoid her as she moved to the other room on my way back to the mission objective. Now, it was time consuming. It definitely took more time, and I think that just the frustration of losing and then having your time wasted with how the game mode was supposed to go is probably what actually spelled the death knell for this, because people are far more concerned about farming in the Warframe community than they are about the individual gameplay experience that is delivered with each update. And that's mainly just a difference between old-time players and new players, because new players are looking to experience everything the game has to offer, and there's a lot, and they don't want their progress through the game feel like it's being artificially slowed. Whereas a lot of long-time players are actually just looking for novel experiences. They have everything that they could possibly need, so they don't actually need to spend all that much time worrying about how quick the farm can be completed. That's kind of the camp that I'm at, though I also know that there are other long-time players who think the game mode sucked, and I really disagree with their tastes. And the third complaint, which really killed the aesthetic and the flow of the gameplay of this mode for me, is the one that got agreed to most readily, is making Follie no longer invulnerable. Giving her a health bar that you could shoot at and cause her to go away and disappear from you for a moment. And that really turned this game mode away from being the horror game mode that it had imagined itself to be originally into just any other mode with any other enemy that you could shoot and kill. She went from being like a serious horror game threat to being kind of an unimpressive Eximus unit with no overguard, with no survivability, who would just do a lot of damage if you're near her. That's the toxic Eximus. That's not impressive anymore. It's not something to be scared of, because with most of the Warframes that can just constantly do damage in large areas, she's going to constantly disappear and keep her distance from you, rather than being constantly on your tail and causing you to need to use the movement system to stay away from her. She doesn't even move all that fast. She walks gradually and gently towards you for the entire duration of the mission. It's only when she spawns in different rooms can she get near you. Though I suppose they did fix her having some time for her damage radius to go outward, whereas sometimes when she would respawn, she would already have the full radius of dealing damage around her and kind of catch you in a small room. But I mean, this game mode was, before the changes, was the first time that I actually had to be using the last breath mechanic consistently, and also that the last breath mechanic was challenging but doable because the enemies weren't ridiculously level capped, high armored, high damage sponge enemies. Quite honestly, I'm not that good with the operator mode. I'm not that skilled on how to use it because I tend not to have a need to use it in most cases. So when I do need to use them, when running Steel Path or other such long run missions, it's usually in a situation where I can't get the last grasp to work due to my own skill. But in this mode, I found myself using it maybe 2 or 3 times in a mission if it was going particularly poorly, and that was an interesting challenge on top of the challenge of navigating around Follie's gameplay. So yeah, just me griping at the community. I don't want to hear anyone say in the next year that the game is too easy, because apparently when we create a novel and interesting way of making the game hard, of making the game difficult in a way that no one is used to experiencing by challenging a new skill, we get mad and we tell them to change it. I'm just glad that I have my original footage from my first playthrough of the game mode before any of the changes took place. So I'm going to put this video up there as a bit of a testament, an epigraph, a tombstone, if you will, for what the game was, what the game mode was, and what was lost in terms of the aesthetic of how you actually play it. Now, it has become a game mode where I throw out my AoE abilities with Uriel, everything dies, I get a bunch of health orbs, and Follie never touches me or gets in the same room as me. So it's fun in its own way, but not as a horror game. But let me know if I'm alone in this opinion. Am I way off base? Was my experience of fun wrong? Should I not have had fun with the original mode? Did you? Were you one of those people who were like me that did enjoy it as it was? Or did you dislike it for a reason that I didn't list? For a reason that wasn't one of the common reasons that was being felt in the community? Because this video may be entirely off base for you. But that's all. Thank you for watching, everyone. Take care of each other and stay true.